The cowboy rejected every woman until she asked, a wife or another winter alone. The cowboy was a man who had always walked his own path. From the moment he could remember, his life had been shaped by hard work, quiet mornings, and the endless stretch of land around him. He lived far from the bustling town, on a small piece of land his family had once cared for, and he knew every hill, stream, and tree as if they were part of him. When he woke up each morning, the first sound he heard was the soft rustling of the wind through the pines and the low, familiar neigh of his horse. These simple things were the heartbeat of his life, and they were enough for him. People in the town often wondered why he was alone. He was strong, capable, and kind in ways that only those who met him closely could see. But to the townsfolk, he seemed distant, even cold. Women admired him from afar, drawn by the quiet confidence in the way he moved, the honesty in his eyes, and the stories whispered about his skill on the land. He could ride for hours across the plains, repair broken fences with ease, hunt for food when needed, and care for animals with patience that many found remarkable. Yet every time a woman tried to come close, every time someone offered friendship that might turn into something more, he gently but firmly declined. He did not reject them out of cruelty or pride. It was not a game to him. He simply could not imagine inviting someone into a life so shaped by loss and routine. Years ago, he had experienced pain that left its mark deeper than any scar from the land. His family, the few people who had truly mattered to him, were gone, taken by circumstances he had never been able to control. He had buried them quietly, without fuss or ceremony, and then turned to the only thing that felt real, the work that kept him alive, the animals that needed care, and the land that never asked for more than he could give. Love, he had learned, could vanish in a single moment. Loneliness, while heavy, was consistent, and he knew how to live with it. Each winter he prepared carefully. The cold in those parts could be harsh, biting even through layers of wool and leather. He chopped wood, stacked it neatly beside the cabin, and made sure every window and door was sealed tight. He did not leave gaps for warmth to escape, because the cold had a way of finding weakness, and he had learned that weakness was dangerous. The same went for his heart. He built walls around it, and they were strong as the cabin he called home. Many women had come and gone, leaving behind hopes he could never return, and he did not want to feel that loss again. Yet despite his careful life, there was a rhythm to it that people found fascinating. Children in the town would sometimes watch him ride across the fields, his silhouette framed against the rising sun, and whisper stories to their parents. "He's like the wind," they would say. "He comes, he moves, he works, and then he's gone again." The adults often shook their heads, unsure whether to admire him or pity him, but he never noticed their opinions. He only noticed the land, the animals, and the quiet that surrounded him. Even the animals seemed to understand him. His horse, a strong, dark brown mare, would wait patiently for him outside the cabin each morning, ready for the long ride across the hills. The dogs, few in number but loyal, followed him without command, sensing the rhythm of his life. He spoke to them in quiet words, often muttered to himself more than them, and they listened. There was a connection there that he did not have with people, simple, honest, and without the complications that came with human relationships. He had tried once or twice to open his heart. In his younger days, before the weight of loss had taught him caution, he had allowed himself to trust someone to care for them and to imagine a life that was shared. It had not lasted. Circumstances beyond his control had pulled it apart, leaving him alone and careful. After that, he made a promise to himself. He would not allow anyone to step close enough to cause that kind of pain again. It was a promise he kept for years, even as seasons changed and the town around him grew. Despite the isolation, the cowboy was not unhappy. There was a quiet contentment in the routine of his days. He rose with the sun, fed the animals, checked the fences, repaired broken tools, and hunted or fished when necessary. He took pride in his work, in the knowledge that he could provide for himself and his small home, and that he was capable of surviving anything nature sent his way. The wind, the snow, the heat of summer, even the storms, he faced them all with a steady heart and calm hands. That calmness, though, was mistaken by outsiders for coldness. They did not see the depth of thought behind his quiet gaze, the careful planning that went into every day, or the stories he told himself quietly when the nights were long and the fire crackled. The winter was the hardest season. Snow would fall for weeks, sometimes months, covering the ground in white that made travel difficult and left the land feeling endless and empty. It was during these months that loneliness pressed in the hardest. Nights were long and cold, and the silence was almost loud. Yet even then the cowboy managed. He would sit by the fire, mending clothes, carving wood, or writing letters he never sent. He read old books and journals, sometimes laughing softly at passages he remembered from his youth. The wind outside could howl and shake the cabin, but inside he was safe. He had built a world that he could control, and in that world he was the master. Over the years, many women came to him, intrigued by the mystery of the man who rejected every offer of love or friendship. They admired him from a distance and sometimes tried to enter his world, bringing warmth, food, or companionship. Each time he listened politely, smiled politely, and declined with a quiet firmness that never offended but always ended the conversation. The townsfolk were puzzled. Why would he push them away? They asked. He has everything a person could want. Why is he alone? And the answer was simple. He had learned that life was unpredictable, and the heart could not survive repeated losses without careful protection. Solitude, he believed, was safer than heartbreak. Yet even in that solitude, there was a life that few understood. He found beauty in the small things, the first signs of spring in the snow melt, the quiet song of a bird at dawn, the way the firelight danced on the cabin walls. He found satisfaction in work done well, in fences mended, crops planted, and animals cared for. There was a rhythm to it, a harmony that required no other human presence to feel complete. For him, that rhythm was enough. He had built a life that made sense, a life he could control, a life that kept him safe. The cowboy's reputation grew over time, not because of romance or charm, but because of the steadiness and reliability he showed. Farmers sought his advice, neighbors asked for help in difficult times, and yet no one truly penetrated the walls he had built around himself. He was a man apart, not by arrogance but by choice. His solitude was not loneliness, it was a conscious decision, a way to honor the past, protect the present, and survive the future. And so, the winters passed one after another, each bringing the same challenges, the same quiet victories, and the same solitary nights. He chopped wood, repaired fences, fed the animals, and walked the land he loved. He rejected women who came with admiration or desire because he could not risk the heartbreak of losing them. And in the quiet of the plains, with only the wind and his horse for company, the cowboy lived exactly as he chose, content in his solitude, strong in his routine, and unwavering in the promise he had made to himself many years ago. For all the townspeople who watched from afar, he was a mystery, a figure of strength and sometimes sadness. But for the cowboy, each day was not a question of loneliness or companionship. It was a matter of survival, of keeping the world steady and simple. He had learned that life could be harsh and unpredictable, and he had found a way to make it bearable. And so he continued, silent and steady, living in a world of his own making, always ready for the next winter, the next challenge, the next day alone, but never empty because he carried the past, the land, and the rhythm of his life with him always. The next season brought changes the cowboy had not expected. Spring was arriving, slowly melting the snow that had blanketed the plains, and with it came a new presence in the town. She was different from anyone he had ever met, quiet, self-assured, and carrying an air of experience that matched the weight of her own past. Unlike the women who had admired him from afar, she did not come to the cabin with wide eyes or soft words meant to impress. She walked with purpose, carrying herself as someone who had known hardship and yet refused to be broken by it. The first time he saw her was at the edge of town, where the general store met the dirt road. She was carrying a basket of supplies, and she glanced up when she noticed him watching. Unlike others, she did not blush, smile nervously, or shy away. She simply looked at him with calm eyes, as if she were measuring the distance between them, trying to understand what kind of man he was. And for the first time, he felt a stir of curiosity he had not experienced in years. She had come to the town seeking a new beginning, a place to rebuild her life after years of struggle. She knew the hardships of living alone, of facing the cold nights and long days without support, yet she was not afraid to face them again. She had learned that survival required courage, not just in labor but in the choices one made. When she learned about the cowboy, she did not rush to meet him. She observed from a distance, listening to the whispers of the townspeople, and piecing together a picture of a man who was strong, capable, and fiercely independent. One morning, as the cowboy rode across the plains checking fences and inspecting the land, she approached him. She did not call out or wave. She simply walked along the path until she was close enough to speak, her voice steady and clear. "You work hard to keep the land alive," she said. "But even the strongest land needs care, and even the strongest man needs company." The cowboy stopped, surprised by her directness. He had grown accustomed to polite nods, fleeting smiles, and gentle attempts at conversation. This was different. She was not asking for attention or admiration. She was stating a truth, one that he had not dared to acknowledge himself. He studied her quietly, unsure how to respond. Years of solitude had taught him caution. He could not allow anyone to see the cracks in his careful walls, the moments of doubt and longing he had kept hidden for so long. "I'm not looking for friendship," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "I manage well enough on my own." She nodded as if she had expected that answer. "I don't ask for friendship. I only ask that you consider the winter ahead. A life alone is hard, harder than any labor on the land. You know this." Her gaze held his, steady and unwavering, and for a moment he felt the weight of her words in a way he had not felt from anyone before. Days passed, and she did not pressure him. She came to the town early in the morning and returned late, always working on her own projects, helping neighbors, and quietly establishing herself as someone reliable and capable. But whenever she saw him, she spoke in ways that were small but significant. A comment on the weather, a question about his animals, or a remark about the land. Nothing intrusive, nothing demanding. And slowly, without him realizing it, she began to occupy his thoughts. For the first time in years, he noticed the sound of someone else's voice and how it fit into the rhythm of his day. He realized that her presence did not disrupt his life, it complemented it. Yet he resisted, reminding himself of the promise he had made to live alone, to avoid the pain of loss and disappointment. He was cautious, measuring every interaction, every word, and every glance. He had survived without anyone for so long, and he did not intend to risk what he had built. One afternoon, a storm came suddenly, dark clouds rolling over the plains faster than anyone had expected. The wind picked up, and the first drops of rain fell, heavy and cold. The cowboy was miles from the cabin, repairing a fence near the creek, and he felt the chill deep in his bones. He worked quickly, trying to finish before the storm grew worse, but it was clear he would not make it back in time. As he struggled with the fence, he saw her approaching through the rain, carrying a heavy cloak and a bundle of supplies. She did not call out. She simply walked with purpose, offering him the coat without a word. "You'll need this," she said, holding it steady. "The storm isn't going to wait, and neither should you." He hesitated, pride and caution warring inside him, but there was a sincerity in her eyes that broke through his defenses. He accepted the cloak, and together they worked to secure the fence until the storm passed. It was a small act, yet it carried a significance he could not ignore. In that moment, he realized that companionship was not about weakening oneself. It was about sharing burdens, facing challenges together, and finding strength in another's presence. Over the following weeks, their interactions grew naturally. She would visit him at the cabin sometimes, helping with chores that required more than one set of hands. They would sit by the fire, talking quietly about the land, the animals, and the work that needed to be done. She never pried into his past, never demanded his trust, but offered it freely in return. The cowboy found himself listening, talking, and laughing in ways he had not done in years. He felt a warmth that was not just from the fire, but from the presence of someone who understood the rhythm of his life. It was not love at first sight. It was a slow, steady recognition that came from shared experience and mutual respect. She was not trying to change him, nor was he trying to impress her. They were two people, each carrying the weight of their own pasts, finding a way to navigate the present together. She admired his strength and his care for the land, while he admired her resilience, intelligence, and quiet determination. One evening, as the sun set over the plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, she asked a question that lingered in his mind long after she had spoken. "Will you face another winter alone?" she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "Or will you let someone walk beside you?" He did not answer immediately. The question was simple, yet it carried weight. It forced him to consider what he had avoided for years. He realized that rejecting everyone had not protected him. It had only kept him from experiencing the possibility of trust and companionship. For the first time, he wondered what it might be like to share the long nights and hard work with someone who did not demand, but simply existed as an equal partner. Days turned into weeks, and he found himself reflecting on her words. He noticed the small ways she had become part of his routine, the meals shared after work, the quiet conversations by the fire, the way she moved with the land as naturally as he did. He realized that he had not just allowed her presence, but had come to depend on it in ways that were subtle and profound. The townspeople began to notice the change too. He was less distant, more willing to talk, and occasionally seen walking with her along the edge of the fields. Yet he did not flaunt it, nor did he seek their approval. This connection was private, built on mutual understanding rather than public display. And in that privacy, he found something he had not realized he missed: companionship that did not threaten his independence, but enhanced it. By the time the next storm approached, he was no longer surprised to see her helping, quietly observing the land, offering advice, and standing beside him as he worked. He realized that her presence had become natural, like the rhythm of the wind or the steady beat of his own heart. And in that realization, he began to see that perhaps life did not have to be endured alone, that trust could be earned slowly, and that the walls he had built around his heart might not be as necessary as he had believed. In the quiet moments, he caught himself imagining a future where she was there not just for a day or a storm, but for many seasons to come. The thought was both terrifying and comforting, but more importantly, it was real. He could see that companionship did not mean weakness. It meant sharing life with someone who understood it as deeply as he did. And so, slowly, the cowboy began to let the idea take root. The woman had not demanded love or rushed into his life. She had simply existed, patiently, showing him that trust and care could be given without fear of loss. And in that patience, he began to find a new rhythm, one where solitude was no longer the only option, and where life might be shared without losing himself. For the first time in many years, he realized that someone had seen him, Not just the man on the land, the worker, or the mystery, but the person who had lived through loss, learned resilience, and survived winters alone. And in that recognition, something shifted quietly, deeply, and irreversibly. He did not know what the future held, but he knew that the possibility of facing it together with her was something worth considering. Winter came again, colder and longer than the cowboy had remembered in years past. The first frost appeared earlier than usual, painting the plains in white and silver, and a sharp wind cut through the valleys, warning that the season ahead would be harsh. The cowboy had prepared, as he always did, stacking wood, sealing the cabin, and making sure every tool, fence, and animal was ready for the cold months. Yet this winter felt different. For the first time in a long while, he was not alone. The woman had chosen to stay in town, but she visited frequently, helping with chores, observing the land, and quietly sharing her presence. At first, he resisted relying on her. He was used to facing storms and snowdrifts by himself, measuring the cold against his strength and endurance. But this winter reminded him that strength did not always come from solitude. On the second day of heavy snowfall, a fence near the creek collapsed under the weight of ice, and he found himself struggling to lift the frozen wood into place. The cold bit into his fingers, and the wind pushed against him like a living thing. She arrived without announcement, pulling her coat tight and approaching steadily. "Let me help," she said, and without waiting for permission, she lifted one end of the fence with him, matching his rhythm, working as if she had always been part of the land. It was a small act, but it stayed with him. He realized that her presence did not intrude, it complemented him. She did not take over, she did not demand attention. She simply shared the work, matching his effort with skill and patience. That night by the fire, he found himself speaking more than he had in months, telling her about the land, the animals, and the routines he had followed for years. She listened quietly, nodding when necessary, asking questions that showed she understood, and slowly he felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. The days passed with snow falling steadily, covering the plains in white and forcing them to rely on their preparation and each other. They worked together to repair fences, feed the animals, and ensure the cabin remained warm and safe. She had brought supplies from town, storing extra food, blankets, and firewood, and he began to see that sharing the labor did not diminish his independence. It enhanced it. Her presence made the tasks lighter, and her quiet confidence reassured him that he could survive the harsh season, not just alone, but with someone beside him. They began to talk more deeply during these quiet moments. The conversations were never forced or rushed. By the fire over warm tea, they shared stories of their pasts, hardships, and lessons learned. He learned about her life, the struggles she had faced, the decisions that had shaped her, and the moments that had taught her resilience. She learned about him, the losses he had endured, the family he had buried in the land he loved, and the solitude he had chosen to protect himself. Each story brought them closer, not as lovers at first, but as two people who finally understood one another. The stormiest nights were the hardest. Winds howled through the trees, rattling the cabin, and snow piled high against the doors and windows. One night, as the storm raged, a young calf wandered too close to the frozen creek. The cowboy grabbed his coat and braved the elements, the snow biting his cheeks and the ice threatening to pull him down. She followed without hesitation, guiding him toward the animal, holding onto him when the ground became slippery, and helping him pull the frightened calf to safety. They returned to the cabin, soaked and shivering, but alive, and for the first time, the cowboy realized that facing danger with someone you trust could be both frightening and reassuring. Even simple tasks became moments of connection. While cooking meals, they laughed at minor mistakes, burnt bread, spilled soup, or a knocked-over kettle. While tending the animals, they shared stories and observations, noting how the snow affected the herd, which paths were safest, and which fences needed attention. Each day, he found himself noticing small things about her: the way she laughed softly, how she moved with confidence, or the quiet way she checked on his well-being without ever seeming to intrude. He realized that companionship was not about grand gestures or constant attention. It was about these shared moments, these small but meaningful acts that made life more bearable. The winter nights were long, and silence often stretched between them. Yet the silence was no longer uncomfortable. He found comfort in her presence, sitting by the fire while she read aloud from old journals or recited memories of her travels and life. Sometimes she simply sat, watching him work or mending clothes, her calm presence filling the cabin with warmth. For the first time, he understood that silence could be shared, that being together did not always require words, and that trust could grow in quiet, steady ways. As the season continued, the cowboy began to reflect on the choices he had made in the past. Rejecting every woman had been his way of protecting himself, but he now saw that protection had also prevented connection, warmth, and shared joy. He realized that survival was not only about enduring hardship alone, it was about sharing the burden, finding someone who understood the rhythms of life, and allowing that person to walk beside you without fear or expectation. One afternoon, the snow softened under a rare burst of sunlight, and they walked along the edge of the frozen creek together. The cowboy noticed how naturally she moved with him, how she observed the land and animals with the same care he did, and how she spoke with a quiet wisdom that he had not expected. "You have built a strong life," she said softly, "but strength is better when it's shared. Even the land needs water to thrive." Her words were simple, yet they echoed deeply within him, planting the idea that companionship was not weakness, but nourishment for the heart. He began to open up more, sharing not only the daily tasks, but also his thoughts and worries about the future. The winter had always been a test of endurance, but this one tested more than strength. It tested his ability to trust, to rely on another, and to see the value in shared effort. He realized that he could protect himself and still allow someone else into his life. He could survive the cold months without losing his independence, and he could find warmth without fear of loss. Their bond deepened in small, meaningful ways. She learned how he liked his fire stacked, which tools were most important, and the best paths to travel across the snow-covered plains. He learned how she anticipated problems before they arose, how she could calm the animals with a gentle word, and how her presence brought steadiness even to moments of chaos. They worked together without needing to speak constantly, understanding each other's rhythms and movements. The trust between them grew, quietly and steadily, like the slow accumulation of snow on the hills. By midwinter, the cowboy began to notice changes within himself. He no longer dreaded the nights as he once had. He found that he looked forward to her visits, to the shared work, to the quiet moments by the fire. He discovered that allowing another person into his life did not diminish his strength, it enhanced it. He realized that the isolation he had chosen for so long had protected him from pain, but it had also prevented him from experiencing connection, warmth, and the satisfaction of shared triumphs. One night, as they sat by the fire, she spoke softly. "Winter will not last forever, but these months can teach us much about life and trust. You have faced every storm alone, but sometimes facing it together makes the journey easier." The cowboy looked at her, seeing not just the woman who had come into his life, but the partner he had slowly learned to rely on. Her words were gentle, but they carried the weight of truth, and he felt a shift in his heart, a quiet understanding that he no longer needed to face life entirely alone. The days of winter passed, filled with work, small joys, and growing trust. They repaired fences, cared for animals, and endured storms side by side. The cowboy realized that the connection he had built with her was not forced or sudden. It had grown naturally, like the slow melting of snow in spring, revealing new life beneath. He began to see that love, or something like it, was not about rushing or grand gestures. It was about steady presence, shared experience, and the quiet understanding that comes from truly seeing another person. By the time the first signs of spring appeared, the cowboy knew that the winter had changed him. He had faced the cold, the storms, and the long nights, but he had also discovered the value of trust, companionship, and shared effort. He understood that his solitude had served its purpose, but now he was ready to consider a different kind of life, one that included someone who walked beside him, not as a distraction, but as an equal partner. And so, the cowboy and the woman entered the final weeks of winter with a new understanding. They had faced the cold together, and in doing so, had built a bond stronger than the harshest storm. The winter had tested them, as it always tested those who lived on the plains, but it had also revealed that strength could be shared, that trust could be earned, and that companionship could transform even the harshest season into something meaningful. Ing slowly arrived on the plains, melting the last traces of snow and filling the air with the fresh scent of new life. The cold winds that had howled for months softened into gentle breezes, and the sunlight reached places it had not touched in weeks. For the cowboy, this spring felt different from all the others. He had faced winters alone many times, relying only on himself and the land, but this year had been unlike any before. The long, harsh months had not only tested his strength and endurance, they had tested his heart, his willingness to trust, and his ability to accept someone into his life. The woman had stayed through the winter, quietly helping with chores, repairing fences, caring for animals, and simply being present. Her presence had never felt forced or demanding. It had grown naturally into the rhythm of his life. He realized now, as the sun melted the ice on the streams and revealed the green of the grass, that her companionship had become essential. The land and the animals could survive without her, but he had learned that life was richer when shared. One morning he watched her work near the barn, stacking wood neatly while the sun shone on her shoulders. She moved with calm efficiency, her hands steady, her expression serene. He felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the sunlight or the firewood. It was a warmth that came from recognition, respect, and the quiet bond they had built through the hardships of winter. For the first time, he considered the future not as a solitary journey but as one that could be shared. He approached her slowly, unsure how to begin. Words had never been easy for him when they carried weight, especially the weight of feelings he had long kept buried. "You've been here through everything," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "Through the storms, the cold, and all the work. I can't imagine facing the rest of the year without you now." She looked up at him, calm and understanding. She had known this moment would come, but she did not rush or push. Instead, she smiled softly, a gesture full of patience and quiet strength. "You don't have to face it alone," she said. "I want to be here because I choose to, not because you need me, but because I want to walk beside you." Her words were simple, yet they carried the weight of everything that had passed between them. The shared storms, the nights by the fire, the quiet work on the land, and the trust they had built over weeks and months. The cowboy felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to shift. He realized that solitude had protected him, yes, but it had also kept him from experiencing the depth of connection, trust, and care that one could only find in true companionship. From that morning on, the rhythm of their days changed in subtle but important ways. They still worked hard as they always had, repairing fences, tending animals, and caring for the land. But there was now a quiet joy in their labor. Tasks that had once felt burdensome became lighter when shared, and the long days of work were punctuated with laughter, conversation, and small gestures of care. He noticed the way she anticipated what needed to be done, the way she moved with the land as if she were part of it, and the way she made even the simplest acts, bringing water, mending clothes, feeding animals, feel significant. The townspeople began to notice a change in him as well. He was no longer distant or untouchable. He greeted neighbors more openly, smiled more easily, and occasionally spoke of plans for the land, sharing his knowledge with a quiet pride. Yet his attention was focused on someone other than the town. His days were filled with the shared presence of the woman, and he found that his life, once orderly and solitary, now had a richness he had not known he was missing. One afternoon, as the first buds appeared on the trees and the streams ran clear with melted snow, they walked together along a familiar path through the hills. The cowboy paused, looking out over the plains he had loved for so long. "I've faced many winters alone," he said quietly, "but I see now that surviving alone isn't the same as living. I've learned that life is better when shared, even when it means trusting again." She placed a hand lightly on his arm, a gesture of support and understanding. "And trust isn't weakness," she said. "It's courage. You've shown courage your whole life, not just with work, but with every choice you've made to survive and care for this land. Choosing to share that courage with someone else only makes it stronger." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time felt the future stretching before him, not as a path of solitude, but as one walked together. He realized that he did not have to lose his independence to share his life. He could maintain the strength, skill, and care that had defined him for so long, and still allow someone into his world. He could face storms, winters, and hardships without being alone, and in doing so, find something deeper than survival, companionship, trust, and a shared life. The following weeks were filled with quiet but meaningful moments. They repaired the last fences damaged by the winter, planted seeds for the coming season, and cared for the animals with a shared understanding that made each task more satisfying. They laughed together over minor mishaps, shared meals by the fire, and spoke openly about their hopes for the future. The cowboy felt the weight of loneliness lift, replaced by a steady, comforting presence that reminded him daily that life could be shared without fear or compromise. As spring fully arrived, bringing warmth and life to the plains, the cowboy made a decision that had once seemed impossible. He chose to embrace companionship, to open his heart fully, and to share his life with someone who had proven herself trustworthy, capable, and deeply human. He asked her to stay, not just through the seasons, but as a partner in life, sharing work, hardships, and joys. She accepted, of course, but not with ceremony or grand words. Their partnership was practical, grounded in mutual respect and understanding. They had built trust over time, and their bond was not sudden or fragile. It was strong, steady, and enduring. The cowboy realized that choosing her did not make him weaker. It made his life richer, fuller, and more meaningful. He did not lose his independence. He redefined it as shared strength. Together, they faced the land and its challenges as a team. When storms came, they worked side by side. When the animals needed care, they managed together. When evenings fell, they sat by the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. Life continued to test them, as it always would, but they no longer faced it alone. The harshness of the winters no longer seemed as daunting, because they had found strength in each other's presence. The townspeople noticed the transformation as well. The once distant cowboy was now seen walking with her across the plains, speaking with ease and sharing responsibility. People whispered about the change, but he no longer cared about opinions or curiosity. He had found what mattered, someone who walked beside him not out of need but out of choice, and whose presence made life fuller and the work lighter. Even small routines became meaningful. Sharing meals, tending to animals, walking along familiar paths, or watching the sunset together. All ordinary moments were now filled with connection, trust, and quiet joy. The cowboy learned that life was not just about surviving storms or winters. It was about sharing the journey with someone who understood the land, the hardships, and the heart. By the time the first flowers of spring bloomed across the plains, the cowboy felt a sense of peace he had never known. He was no longer a solitary figure enduring the harsh seasons. He was part of a partnership built on respect, trust, and shared experience. He understood that rejecting love had protected him, yes, but it had also denied him the richness of life that comes from connection. And now, after the long winter and the quiet months of trust building, he had discovered that life could be shared without losing oneself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, the cowboy and the woman stood together, looking out over the land. He felt a calm he had not known in years, a deep satisfaction in knowing that he had made the choice to embrace companionship. He realized that the future, once daunting and lonely, now held promise, warmth, and partnership. The decision was not sudden or romanticized. It was practical, steady, and real. It was the life he had always wanted, though he had not known it until now. In that quiet moment, he understood the true lesson of the winter they had survived together. That strength is measured not only in endurance, but in the willingness to trust, to share, and to embrace life alongside someone who sees you for who you are. He did not need to fear loss anymore because he had found someone whose presence made even the harshest seasons bearable. He had chosen wisely, and he knew that this choice would shape the rest of his life for the better. And so, the cowboy and the woman began a new chapter together. The land remained challenging, the seasons unpredictable, and the work never-ending. But the weight of it all was lighter because they faced it side by side. The cowboy, once a solitary figure enduring winters alone, had learned the power of trust, companionship, and shared life. He had not lost himself. He had gained a life richer than he could have imagined. And for the first time in many years, he welcomed the future with an open heart.